We all rely on farmers and ranchers, but farming is riskier than other businesses out there. Crop insurance helps farmers manage their risk. With crop insurance, farmers put skin in the game by paying premiums and shouldering deductibles. That keeps taxpayers from having to pick up the whole bill every time disaster strikes. Today, about 90% of U.S. farmland is insured, providing $100 billion in protection to more than 130 different kinds of crops. It's a testament to the program's success.
Thank you for joining us for our Agri-Pulse Washington Week in Review. I'm Spencer Chase, and we're joined today by South Dakota Senator Mike Rounds. Senator Rounds, I appreciate you taking a little bit of time to join us.
Hey, thank you very much. It's always a pleasure to visit about South Dakota's #1 industry.
Very good. So I want to talk about not necessarily agriculture specifically on this first question, but more broadly a subject that has had the attention of quite a few folks in Congress over the last couple of months, really. And that, of course, being the subject of coronavirus relief and the efforts to secure it. It seems to me, as I kind of from the outside looking in, a lot of what we're doing is giving press officials different ways to say, progress in talks. Do you think that the talks that are happening between Treasury Secretary Steve Mnuchin and House Speaker Nancy Pelosi, are we closer to a deal now than we were in the last couple of weeks, last couple of months?
I don't think so. I think there's going to be lots of people talking about it, but very honestly, and I know I'm a Republican and it sounds like I'm being partisan, but I think Speaker Pelosi's plan is not to do anything until after the election. I think politically she's measured this out and she's decided that it's better off politically for them if they don't give President Trump a win. I think after the election, they'll come to terms fairly quickly. Look, we all agree PPP should be extended. We need it. We all agree that we should be doing something additional, even in smaller amounts, but something for the unemployment funds. And I think there's clear understanding that most of us would like to do a stimulus package for individual Americans. We recognize we've got to help some of our schools that right now have had added expenses trying to maintain and keep their schools as safe as possible, but also doing, video and so forth, and having their kids being able to do in a hybrid situation, getting some education from home in some cases. Hospitals have had more expenses, and we most certainly are going to have more costs involved in getting our vaccines and our therapeutics out. Republicans and Democrats all agree on that. And yet each time that the speaker has brought up a proposal, she's continued to insist on further legalization of cannabis or marijuana, and she's further insisted that federal funding of abortion be included in these programs. She knows that those two are not related to the COVID-19 pandemic, and yet she's continued to put those in, knowing full well that they are a non-starter in the United States Senate. So I think it's intentional, and I think they'll continue to negotiate. And I could be surprised. I hope I'm surprised, because we can do this in a matter of a day or 2 days once we get something done. But I really think that the intent is not to do it before the election.
So, of course, agriculture has a few things that it's looking for out of these talks as well, namely things like support for biofuel producers, support for producers that had to depopulate their hogs, etc. If and when we get to a point where a deal can potentially be reached, do you think there's going to be room for those agriculture provisions, or is it going to need to be a pared down, skinny deal with just, strictly things like PPP, airlines, a narrower legislative package?
I think there will be some things in there for ag. It's just kind of like the continuing resolution. We had to do some negotiations between the House and the Senate, but the CCC had money put back into it. The CFAP 2.0 is there right now. I think that was included in the continuing resolution. So yeah, I think there will be some items in there for ag, but a lot of it's going to depend on whether or not after the election there's actually an agreement to sit down. I think there will be, because I really do think Republicans and Democrats understand that there is still a need to address specifically these areas that have been impacted by this pandemic. And, for every one person that's been impacted medically by this pandemic, 33 people have been impacted by the economics of this pandemic. So we've got to continue to focus on that as well.
Also want to chat with you about a number of pieces of legislation that have been introduced by either yourself, a number of your colleagues in the Senate, a colleague of yours from South Dakota in the House, that to kind of take a look at the cattle industry and see if there isn't potentially some reforms there that could be had sort of in the wake of the Holcomb plant fire last year, the coronavirus pandemic this year, a lot of extra attention being paid to the cattle industry. And I know there's a lot of, being a native South Dakotan myself, I know there's a lot of cattle in your home state. There's not a lot of cattle in a few other states. Do you think that there's enough momentum on this issue to potentially, gain consideration for some of these broad sweeping reforms from lawmakers that, might not come from a state or a district where there's more cattle than people?
I think there is a movement moving forward, and I think the pandemic brought some of it to the forefront. The Holcomb fire most clearly had an impact as well. Look, we've got about a concentration of about 80 some percent, 81 or 82% of the cattle packing businesses in 4 companies. That clearly suggests that there may be issues involving antitrust. In March, I led a letter. I started out, I could get 3 other members of the Senate to join with me on a letter asking the Justice Department, not the Department of Ag, but the Justice Department, to investigate price fixing activity to find out whether or not there was price fixing going on and whether or not the antitrust statutes that we have in place were being followed. About a month and a half later, we had 18 of us on that same letter, and the president even weighed in saying he thought the Department of Justice should investigate. That investigation is ongoing right now. So yeah, we're making some headway. In fact, I think we're making more headway now than I've seen in the last 5 years. Same thing with mandatory country of origin labeling. Look, the WTO clearly challenged us and said they were going to basically put tariffs on of over $2 billion back in 2015 on other commodities. But what they didn't tell us is that we couldn't try again to put mandatory country of origin labeling in as long as it was part of our trade deals. So Senator Tester and I have got bipartisan legislation into the Senate right now that would direct our trade representatives to include mandatory country of origin labeling in future trade agreements, including Canada and Mexico. That would take care of the issue that the WTO had in the first place and would give our producers more of a fair playing field. The other thing right now, and I just got to share with you my frustration on this. Can you imagine our own Department of Agriculture since 2003 has had a rule on their books? Now, this is our Department of Ag at the federal level that says that if one of our packers wants to bring in boxed beef from overseas, they can bring it in, and all they have to do is repackage it, and they can put a voluntary label on it of product of the USA. Now, if that isn't false advertising for the consumer, and if that isn't not playing or giving our own producers a fair shot, I don't know what else it could be. And I mean, it makes me sick to my stomach to think that it would last this long. So we've got a bill in. This is after we went to the Department of Ag and said, hey, what's going on here? They came back and they said, yeah, we know it's not right. We should be doing something about it. That was 6 months ago. Nothing's happened yet. So we've got legislation in to tell them that in order to use this voluntary label that says product of the USA, it should be born in the United States, it should be raised in the United States, fed in the United States, and processed in the United States. Then you can put that voluntary label, product of the USA, on it. We've got some other items on there as well. There's a number of different pieces of legislation that we're working with other members on a bipartisan basis. But yeah, I think the time has come. We're going to have to reform this packing industry.
So, you say that there's some momentum for the conversations. Momentum is one thing and legislative action is another. When you look forward, what's your thought process on, is this something where some of the more non-controversial provisions can be addressed this year and other stuff down the line? And I guess when is down the line? I mean, is this something that you think can happen in 21, or is this potentially a 2023 Farm Bill issue, some of these cattle issues?
This is not going to be an easy issue to do. There are interests in Washington, D.C. that have no desire to have change because they like it the way that it is now. I just give you an example. You would think most producers would say, you know what, we need more processing facilities. These small state licensed processing facilities, they're a good thing. And lots of our folks use them. Did you know that these state processing facilities, which have to have and meet federal guidelines for safety, but they're state licensed, they can't sell across state lines. Well, when we go in and we say, look, they meet the same federal safety standards, let's let them sell across state lines. I put in a bill to find out who would oppose that. What I came back and found out was there are multiple major national organizations that don't want the competition. And their message, and we're bringing them into our office now and saying, explain to us why you don't want these producers that you claim to support, why you don't want them to have another source to go to process their product. This is all about what they believe is if they have to jump through all the hoops and the bureaucracy at the federal level, they think our smaller producers should as well. This isn't right. And so, but there's major powerful forces here that we're going to have to overcome. If it was easy, it would have been done a long time ago. But I can tell you this much, this is something that we're going to get fixed. It may take us some time to get it done, but now is the time that we start bringing food safety into position. We start talking about long-term, having more places to get food processed. And we point out the fact that during the pandemic, our food supply chain had choke spots in it, choke points. And those choke points were these major, large processing facilities that literally, if you shut one down, it impacts 5, 6, 7% of the total market. And it drives the price of our product on the hoof way, way down. It's time we start addressing that now.
Before I let you go, hoping you can kind of crystal ball the rest of the congressional calendar for me a little bit here. Obviously there's going to be, things like consideration of Amy Coney Barrett to the Supreme Court. One would assume that nobody is really looking forward to a potential government shutdown after the current funding bill expires December 11th. So we know there's those two things between now and December 31st that will likely be addressed on Capitol Hill. Anything else that you envision could potentially get through both the House and Senate and be sent to the president's desk between now and the end of the year? Or is this going to be a Supreme Court and CR and potentially COVID relief kind of term?
The Senate can do two things at once. It can do personnel activity, such as judges or executive nominations. It can also do the legislative agenda as well. And you can do them both at the same time. You're not restricted to just one at a time. So I do believe that the Barrett nomination will move forward probably the last week in October. I think that's when the final approval will probably occur. In the meantime, I don't expect a lot of activity on the legislative side until after the election. Between the election and the end of this congressional session, which is the end of December, I would expect that we'll do a continuing resolution until sometime into next year. Democrats have made it very clear that they don't want to do anything until they find out whether they control the White House and the Senate next year. If they're successful in controlling both, then they won't want to negotiate with Republicans on the appropriations process. They'll want to run it themselves next year. So they're not going to do anything until after December, until after the election on that. The National Defense Authorization Act is something that we do pass on a bipartisan basis every single year. I would expect that will come to fruition. Sometime in December, we will pass that on a bipartisan basis. I'm on the Armed Services Committee. We're making very good strides in finding common ground, Republicans and Democrats alike. There's also a time period after the election called the lame duck, in which some things may very well get done that are non-controversial, that have been held up because Republicans don't want Democrats to get credit for anything, and Democrats don't want Republicans to get credit for anything. So after this election, there are a little tiny bit of sanity will come back into the DC place. Not a lot, but a little bit will come back in, and you'll see some bipartisan measures, I believe, passed at that time. But before the election, I think, I think everything right now, unfortunately, is based on what's going to happen on November 3rd. And I wish I could tell you otherwise, but it wouldn't be honest to say that I think anything's going to pop before then.
So I suppose a number of your constituents would see sanity returning to Washington as kind of a relative term, but I suppose that's...
I've got to use that term very, very loosely because the values that so many people in the upper Midwest have, it's just simply, it's lost someplace in Washington, D.C., and we need more of it. But I will tell you this, and it sounds like there are good people on both sides of the aisle. There really are. There are good people that we work with on a regular basis, Republican and Democrat. When you get into the middle of these really partisan issues, people start to become concerned about the folks on the far outer fringes on either side. and they don't want to do anything that creates in their next election an inter-party squabble where they may be very well challenged. And that right now, unfortunately, drives politics in Washington, D.C. when it gets this close to an election cycle.
Well, we are getting close to that election cycle, just a little under 3 weeks away now. I've been joking with folks that we'll be a lot smarter come November 4th. Who knows how long the results will actually take this time around, but obviously a lot of things to watch between now and then. And Senator Rounds, we appreciate you taking a little bit of time to discuss those with us here today.
Thank you very much. We appreciate the opportunity.
For Senator Mike Rounds, I'm Spencer Chase. Have a good one.